3 years ago, everyone was rushing out of the pack house the moment they heard that their future alpha has arrived. It was as if he was a celebrity of some sort. Well, to them, he was. She felt like she was part of a flock of sheep that kept moving together. Since Courtney and her were among the last to step out of the pack house, they couldn't see anything properly. By the murmuring of the pack members around them, it was clear that Damien had stepped out of the car and was now talking to the current beta, which happened to be Courtney's dad, Sean. They couldn't hear anything as they stood too far away from them, but she could clearly tell Damien's form was tense. It wasn't like he was a social person anyways. She had this nagging feeling inside herself that something was going to happen today, and not in a good way either. Her trail of thoughts were cut off by Courtney saying, "What are we waiting for? Let's head to the front to get a good look." I bet he has gotten even hotter seeing how these girls are screaming so desperately. She just nods her head at Courtney's words and continues looking around her. Sure, there were many girls, mainly teens, pulling their skirts up or tugging their tops down, so their cleavage was visible. Serenity shakes her head at their desperate actions. Courtney grabs her wrist and steering their way towards the front of the crowd, dodging people on the way. And they finally make it to the front of the crowd. It would be a lie if she said he hadn't gotten any hotter, but she would personally prefer the term more handsome. His muscles have gotten even bigger than the last time she saw him, which was 3 years ago, when he was 18. He was 21 now. He had a lean build as well, which she preferred rather than a hulking frame, and his chest had broadened and his t-shirt was tight over his chest. His legs were strongly built and his shoulder muscles tenses with each of his movements. She bet he would be more handsome in person than he looked from afar. Her wolf has been nagging at her and kept trying to tell her something the moment she and Courtney had stepped out of the pack house. But she brushed it off as nervous jitters of seeing her long-time crush after so long. It is as if he had just remembered the presence of rest of the pack. He turned around and moved his eyes all over the crowd as if searching for something. Then his eyes suddenly stops at Serenity. He stares at her in the eyes and she could hear her wolf go crazy inside of her, shouting something repeatedly. "Mate! Mate! Go to our mate!" Celine yells in her head, causing Serenity's eyes to widen with shock and happiness. She thought her mate would be at least happy to see her. But she guessed wrong. His face remained impassive, although for a fleeting moment she felt some sort of unknown emotion flash. Thought his eyes. And then they were blank, just like his soul. All her life she had been preparing for the possibility that her mate might reject her. But she wasn't prepared for the onslaught of pain that came over her. "And my wolf," Selena whimpers inside her mind. "Mate doesn't want us." She thought her mate would at least acknowledge her presence. But no. None of that happened. It hurt so much knowing that even the one destined for her by the moon goddess herself didn't want her. She thinks as tears well up in her eyes and looks down in sadness. Mates were precious. At least that was what we were taught. It was said that their souls were the equal halves of each other, which fit like two pieces of a puzzle. When a werewolf comes of age, he or she finds their equal halves and feels whole. The moment she decides to look up, she spots Emily coming forward, and the crowd parts for her. She moves gracefully towards him with a smile on her face, and when he meets her eyes, his eyes lit up like fairy lights. There was a sparkle in his eyes that showed everyone that he genuinely loved her, and she stands upon her tippy toes to meet his towering height and pecks him on his lips. He decides to lift his eyes and look at Serenity, the exact moment their lips touched in a passionate kiss. It was as if he was making a statement. She breaks her stare and looks towards her feet. Her wolf keeps whimpering inside her head. It was starting to give her a headache. She chose to block her out for the time period. Hi. Hi. Damien never expected to find his mate in his own pack. He had searched her for a few years, and even searched for her while visiting a few packs. But he didn't have any luck in finding her. He was shocked when he realized who his mate was. It was his girlfriend's shy and timid little friend. He had always found himself staring at her, well without her knowledge, that is. He had never expected them to end up as mates. He had a constant threat looming over his head. He didn't want to hurt her by being selfish, so he decided to do the only thing that he felt was the best to do at his current situation. Reject her for good. Just give her the freedom she deserved. He thought he was doing something good for once, thinking about how everything would be easy for her if she wasn't claimed by him, and have her life endangered by the same people that threatened his. It hurt her so bad, seeing their interaction and how he just basically and indirectly rejected her by ignoring her presence and locking lips with someone other than his mate, who just happened to be her. Serenity turns away from the couple and makes a move towards the pack house. She could feel herself come close to tearing up, but she didn't let her tears fall, at least until she made her way towards her room. The moment she reached her room, it was like a dam had broken. Tears started falling freely as she lay herself on her bed. "He is your mate, isn't he?" Someone suddenly says, causing Serenity to snap her head towards the voice and find Courtney standing there with a mixture of sadness and anger on her face. She nods her head in reply and Courtney sighs. She could not for the life of her hide anything from Courtney. How can he not acknowledge his own mate for someone else? If Alex did that to me, I would make sure that he doesn't have kids in the future. A smile breaks out Serenity's face at Courtney's words. Courtney gives one of her own when she finds Serenity smiling. Courtney has always been Serenity's rock and has helped her when she was at her lowest. She had shared her happiness and sadness alike, and she clearly knows how to make Serenity smile at times like these. Serenity was so thankful for having her as her best friend. But the moment she remembers about the situation at hand, her smile drops quickly. "He doesn't want me, Court," she says as the tears start falling again. "Hush, girl. We are not talking about your asshole of a mate for now, and we're going to do this my way. We are going to have a girls' night. You know, in those teen stories where the girl ends up having a movie marathon with her best friends when her boyfriend cheats on her or something," she says with scrunching her face up as if it leaves a bad taste in her mouth to say so. Serenity contemplated her offer for a second, and before replying with an okay, Courtney felt really bad for Serenity. She had seen the way that Damien was looking at Serenity outside. It was the same way her mate, Alex, looked at her always, or how mates looked at each other in particular. She had known about Serenity's crush on Damien for a few years now, and also knew how it hurt her more than she let on. Knowing that he was dating Emily, asterisk. Few hours later, asterisk. It has been a few hours since the incident, and Courtney and Serenity have binge-watched the first season of the originals. She felt grateful for this moment and enjoyed it. She ended up forgetting about her mate for the certain amount of time period, just like Courtney had said. She had come down to the kitchen to fetch some water as her throat felt parched. She was about to open the fridge when she felt this prickling feeling on her back, as if someone was staring at her. She turns around, but doesn't find anyone there. She turns back around and continues. As she was about to reach for the water bottle, someone grabs her wrist and starts dragging her somewhere. It all happened so fast that she couldn't react, and by the tingles shooting up her arms at an alarming rate, she knew that it was him, her mate, and their future alpha Damien. He drags her into the supply room and pushes her back onto the wall. She closes her eyes, trying to shake away the pain, and after a moment she opens her eyes and looks at her mate with teary eyes. The only thing she could see, even with her enhanced sight due to the darkness, was his eyes. They were a stormy gray with specks of black and a mix of a slight red in them, which is odd but looked beautiful on him. One of his calloused hands trailed down her face, causing tingles and goosebumps to form on her face due to his touch. But it is gone as fast as she felt it. She was brought out of her trance by hearing him say the words she dreaded the most her entire life. "I, Damien Blackwood, the future alpha of Midnight Moonpack, reject you, Serenity Martins, as my mate and future Luna." It was as if her whole world had crumpled before her eyes, and her wolf, Selena, kept whimpering inside her head. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she kept them at bay for the time period and willed herself to be strong. "I, Serenity Martins, accept your rejection as your mate and future Luna of the Midnight Moon Pack." She saw shock crossing his features. He was not expecting her to accept his rejection, but he quickly masks it up, and his eyes harden once again. The next thing she knows, she was standing alone by herself. The pain hits hard at that moment, and she slid down the wall as a rogue tear falls. Tie. She went to her room after what happened. It has been 1 week since the rejection that only Courtney knew about. She was so angry at first that she even tried to barge into Damien's room, but Serenity luckily talked her out of it. She would have had to face the punishment for disrespecting an alpha. And it wasn't pretty, to say the least. Pain has been a constant Serenity's life now. She has learned to bear with it, but what she wasn't ready for was the pain she felt after 2 days after the rejection. She felt like all the pain in the world was forced upon her being, and it literally felt like her heart would tear into two. She couldn't even breathe, and the next thing she knew, darkness consumes her vision and she blacks out. It was later that day when she was found by Courtney. She was lying on her bedroom floor in a heap with purple and black bruises covering her stomach, thighs, and her hands. She couldn't understand what caused it, so she decided to ask Courtney, who seemed to have more knowledge about the concept of mates. When she was about to reply, Serenity could see the look of pity and hesitancy on her face. She could feel the agonizing pain as Courtney told her what actually led her to completely black out. "I am sorry for being the one to inform you this, and that you are going through this. But this kind of pain takes place to let you know when your other half is having sexual intercourse with someone other than you. Hence the reason why there are bruises littering your body," Courtney said, and it didn't take a genius to figure out what her mate Damien was doing, and with who. Emily. Her whole world shattered, and her wolf, Celine, was constantly whimpering. Later on, Celine blocked everything out, including Serenity, and retreating into the back of her mind, and has not made her presence known since. She has been ignoring Emily since Damien arrived, and she would flee the moment she'd see Emily try to approach her. Serenity guessed that Emily later on caught on to the fact that Serenity was trying to avoid her, but she didn't know the reason behind it. She felt bad though, but seeing him and her together was too much for her to handle. She stumbled upon Damien one day after the whole blacking out scene, and he knew from her facial expression that she knew that he had sex with Emily. And he didn't even try to deny nor explain it. She has been staying more in her room, going out only when she was hungry and at midnight while everyone in the pack were asleep. Courtney comes and checks upon her constantly, but she knows that I need time to take in things. Tawed. Courtney had been the one to come and tell Serenity about what had been going on within the pack house while she has locked herself inside her room. Apparently, Damien had taken up the alpha position, and there was no ceremony done, as he didn't want one. Courtney had come into her room one morning, saying that there was an important pack meeting and how all the members of the pack were expected to attend it. She sighs, knowing there is no way she can stay in her room anymore, and if she did, it would mean that she was blatantly disrespecting the alpha orders. Courtney and Serenity arrive at the pack grounds where the meeting was meant to take place, and she was not surprised to find most of the pack members, including the elders, warriors, teens, and even toddlers, present there. Everyone has been talking to each other and trying to figure out why there was an important meeting called up in the first place. It is only when Damien climbs up onto the stage, along with Beta Sean, who is Courtney's dad, that all the murmuring and chattering turns into dead silence. It is really fascinating to see the effect Damien has over the pack. He clears his throat and starts to say, "As you all know, I've called up this gathering to inform you all about something important that will affect the pack's future greatly." He pauses for a moment, as all the pack has been silently waiting with bated breath for him to make the announcement, and he continues on saying, "I want to introduce you all to my mate and your future Luna, Emily Christie." The pack members all break out in excited chatter, as this is good news, and she would be the new Luna. Some were confused, since werewolves didn't have human mates, but knew better than to question the alpha and his choices. Midnight Moon Pack has not had a Luna for almost a decade. Their last Luna, Damien's mother, was killed by rogues. Ever since her death, it has just been Damien's dad, Alpha Calvin Blackwood, who's been leading the pack along with the help of Courtney's dad, Beta Sean. Her eyes, which had been fixed on the ground all along, snaps up to meet his and her face crumbles, seeing him already looking at her with a cold look in his eyes. She thought her wolf would at least whimper and try to come out of her shell hearing this, but no. She couldn't feel any connection to her at this point. And all Serenity felt was pitch-black emptiness. It doesn't come across as a surprise that he chose someone like her. Emily had a light tan complexion with blonde hair and grayish-blue doe-like eyes, and do not forget those long legs and lean body. She was an angel compared to Serenity. She had a pale complexion with boring hazel brown eyes, brown hair, and not to forget a curvy figure, which some people considered unflattering. Emily climbs onto the stage, from the front of the crowd, and places her hand in his and turns to flash a smile at the excited and happy pack members. "Silence," Damien says, and everyone instantly stops chattering. "We have both decided to get married in the time period of the next 2 weeks." That one sentence was all it took for Serenity to break, and she knew it was the last straw. She shoots Damien, who is already looking at her. A look with a mixture of hurt, betrayal, and anger. She backs away from the crowd from her earlier position. All the while, her eyes were pinned to his, which were looking back at hers with emptiness. She shifts into her wolf, who releases a sad howl, but no one notices as they are so consumed with excitement. She runs toward the pack house and reaches there within record time. She shifts into her human form and goes over room and start packing all her necessities and some money she had saved by working in a cafe into her black duffel bag. When she is almost finished packing, she senses a presence behind her. "Yeah, how be?" She turns around and finds Courtney standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "So you are just leaving like that?" Her voice cracks in the end, and when Serenity tries to open her mouth and say something, Courtney stops her by hugging her tightly. They embrace each other for a few minutes, not saying anything. And when they both pull apart, they both look like a train wreck with mascara and tears running down their faces. "Where are you planning to go?" she asks Serenity after a moment of silence. Serenity sighs, knowing there is no way she can lie about this. "I don't know. I was thinking maybe I could live among the humans," she says, and look at Courtney, anxious to hear her reply. "Well, it is at least better than going into the no man's land," she replies, and Serenity agreed with her. "It is dangerous out there, and you have to always watch your back. There are harmful creatures and vicious rogues out there lurking in the darkness. I will miss you, you know. Not to mention Alex and your parents definitely will miss you too," she says, and again tears fill her eyes. Serenity couldn't remember the last time she had talked to her parents. She had been so caught up with the rejection and pain that she completely avoided any family contact. She knew that they loved her immensely. "Tell them I love them, and that I am sorry," Serenity sighed, causing Courtney to nod her head solemnly. "I have to go now, before anyone returns and sees me," she says, and tears fill her eyes. Goodbyes were always sad. Serenity gives her a weak smile and climbs onto her open windowsill. She jumps and shifts into her dark chocolate brown wolf, with light brown highlight in mid-jump, with the straps of her black duffel bag clamped between jaw. And she runs into the forest, hoping for a new start. Asterisk. 3 years ago, asterisk. It is safe to say that she was miles away from her pack grounds. She had crossed the border about 2 hours ago. Their pack was the strongest pack in America. Yet it does not surprise her that no one noticed when one of the pack members was leaving through the border. They must have been so indulged with the announcement Damien had made a little while ago. She has been running for 2 hours in her human form. It was tiring her out. Growing up, she did not indulge herself in any sports or pack training, so she was sure she was a bit out of shape. She decided to stop and rest for an hour or so before shifting into her brown-colored wolf and continue with her journey. She had noticed a stream a little farther from where she had stopped, and she could literally see it from where she stood. It was beautiful to say the least, and the way the water glistens in the sunlight makes it appear like it was made of sparkling diamonds. She moved towards the edge of the stream and bent her head down so that she could quench her thirst first. She continued lapping at the water with her tongue and continued to drinking the water. From her crouched position on the ground, she was so preoccupied with quenching her thirst that she failed to hear a twig snapping. Not too far away from her, a rogue. It was too late to react. The rogue leaped and clamped its jaw onto her hind leg. She started trashing around in its hold. When she sees an opening, she grabs the opportunity and butts the rogue and eventually escape from its hold before the rogue has time to recover from the pain her head butting had caused. She claws at its back with her long claws and leaving 3 jagged claw marks visible on its back. She knew it would leave a scar as the cuts were deep into the rogue's flesh. The rogue howls in pain but recovers quickly, and its red, empty, and dead eyes are set on her form, his prey. It jumps and tackles her down onto the ground with so much force that her wolf whimpers with pain, and the rogue takes this opportunity to clamp its jaws onto her neck in order to finish her off. One moment she saw its sharp yellow teeth almost about to bite into her neck, and the next thing she knows, the weight of the rogue is gone from above her. A big black wolf had tackled the rogue down from above her and had clamped its jaws onto the rogue's neck and is flinging the rogue from side to side. The rogue lets out a huge whimper, but the wolf effortlessly separates its head from rest of its body. She turns her head from the gruesome scene before her and tries to escape discreetly from the scene, fearing that even though the black wolf had saved her from the rogue, there is no guarantee that she was not going to be its next target. The moment she turns to run, she is tackled down by the big black wolf, and she lays on her back facing it, not wanting to move and come off as a threat. It is only now that she had noticed that this wolf was bigger than the average wolf and stands tall. It has hazel brown eyes similar to hers, and there is no mistaking by its black fur, which usually only alphas have. She turns her head to the side and whimpers, showing the wolf that she submits under its power and means no harm to it. The wolf cocks its head to the side and analyzes her for a second, contemplating whether she was telling the truth or not. It eventually steps back from above her and gives her space to stand up. Shift. She hears a voice say in her mind. Her eyes widen hearing the voice. There is no way anyone from the pack can mind link her. She was far away from the pack house, so there is no way they can. Realization dawns upon her, and she looks towards the wolf and see it giving her a wolfish grin, if you can even call it that. She does not protest, knowing that the wolf means no harm, so she turns around and goes behind a tree to shift and change into some leggings and t-shirt she had taken along with her. She eventually walks towards the spot where she had last seen the black wolf, and instead of finding the wolf, there was a guy standing there with just a pair of basketball shorts, hanging dangerously low on his hips. To say that this man right before her eyes was an average-looking man would be an understatement. Her eyes take in his dark, dirty blonde hair and hazel brown eyes. Just like his wolf, he has a chiseled face with a sharp jawline and high cheekbones that any girl would kill for, and an obvious six-pack and toned legs. Of course, he had to look like a runway model. He is a good-looking male, if she had not found her mate, and even though he rejected her and easily found a replacement, She would date this guy. She pushes the thoughts to the back of her mind. She hears a chuckle, and she instantly realizes that she had been caught checking him out, which causes her to blush a shade of red. I don't mind you drooling over me. I am Matthew. Matthew Wilson. You can call me Matt for short, he says with an amused smile on his face. He smiles a lot for someone who just ripped a wolf's head apart from, like it was a rag doll of some sort. This just proves the phrase, you can't judge a book by its cover. Wait, why does his name sound so familiar, she thinks to herself. Yes, because my pack used to be the strongest until the rogue attack that took place 3 years ago, he says with a dark look on his face, and she realizes that she might have said it out loud. She notices the strong emotion flitting through his hazel eyes. The hatred reflected in his eyes is not directed at her, but he smiles at her afterwards, remembering the situation at hand. She remembers him now. Matthew Wilson, Alpha of Riverstone Pack. Their pack was apparently attacked 3 years ago by a pack of rogues while their Luna went into labor. She still remembers hearing how they attacked and killed her along with their unborn child, killing them both effectively along with the rest of his pack. Because of the pain due to losing his mate, he couldn't do anything to save his pack. Losing a mate you are destined to be with. Most probably wouldn't kill him, but some do go down a dark path while others commit suicide. She is surprised to see that he is still alive. This just proves how strong of a person he is. She does not ask or mention anything about his former pack, knowing that it was a touchy subject for him, especially losing his other half. She was glad, though, that he is not one of those alpha mates who go batshit crazy and go on a killing spree after the demise of their soulmate. He appears to be as normal of a werewolf that there is, even with him being an alpha. If you did not know about his pack beforehand and met him, you would think that he lived a normal and happy life, and not someone who lost their mate and unborn child. I didn't mean to. I am sorry, and I am Serenity, she replies. She was a bit embarrassed after getting caught checking him out. Wow, she did not stutter while talking to this stranger. Now that is a first, she thinks to herself. You know you space out a lot for a wolf. He laughs and says. She scrunches her nose up and asks, what is that supposed to mean, mister? Her sassy side was apparently making an appearance today. He holds his hands up in a mock surrender motion and says, hey, don't take offense, but I mean that you space out a lot for someone who should have heightened sense and all, you know. Oh, is all she could reply. So, what is a pretty girl like you doing here, living a rogue life anyways? I can tell that you are new to it, he asks, and she instantly blushes as this is the first time anyone other than Courtney and her family had called her pretty. She thinks for a moment, deciding whether she should tell some stranger about her life story or not. She eventually decides against it, and replies with stuff happened, and I ran away. He cocks an eyebrow at that, but he does not pry and ask anything related to that. So where are you headed to anyways? He asks, and she narrows her eyes at his question. Honestly, she was surprised that she was not stuttering while talking to someone else. A rogue, and that too an alpha at that. There is a part of her telling her that she could trust him after all he just saved her life. She owed him at least that. I don't know. She replies honestly, and he frowns at that and mutters something under his breath, which she could not hear even with her werewolf hearing. You can join me if you want to, he says, and she contemplates it for a moment, and replies with an okay. He looks surprised at her reply, but quickly recovers, grins, and says, you won't regret it, trust me, and starts walking towards the north, not waiting for her. I hope not, she says under her breath, and follow behind him. Asterisk. 3 years ago. Asterisk. She has been following Matthew for over an hour, and she was getting annoyed by this point, not knowing where he was taking her, but still. She had this feeling that this was not going to be something bad, even though she should feel the opposite. I mean, in 9 out of 10 instances, what was the possibility of coming out alive, if you blindly follow a stranger you just met 4 hours ago. Maybe this was meant to be, and Matthew's sudden appearance was to serve a purpose in her life, she thought to herself. It feels weird calling him Matt. She would rather call him by his full name. She heaves out a tired sigh and stops following him. Where are you taking me? She asks him, exasperated. He notices that she had stopped following after him like a headless chicken and has been standing still for over a minute. He turns around and smiles sheepishly at her. How oblivious to his surroundings was he? She think and scoff at the irony. She was pretty sure he said something pretty similar to this not so long ago. Hypocrite, she thought. We are going to where I live, he replies, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world, and she shoots him a blank face. Where do you live, genius? She asks him sarcastically, and he replies, glancing around at their surroundings. Among humans, but you can find some lone wolves here and there. She nods her head at his reply. At least she wouldn't have to face another batshit crazy rogue. Thank God. She would only have to face some lone wolves and not a pack, or even worse rogues. She shudders thinking about her almost death experience on meeting one. Come on, it is only like 10 minutes away, he says, and starts walking towards wherever he is taking her, and she follows him wordlessly. They walk for about a few more minutes before Matthew stops walking, causing her to almost run into his back. Thank goodness for werewolf senses. She steps towards the side and gapes at the building in front of her. She thought he might take her to some dingy apartment, or even a cheap motel, but this... She wasn't expecting this. It wasn't a motel, or a dingy apartment. In fact, it was a condo. It was beautiful from the outside, and she was sure it would be even more beautiful on the inside. He led her inside, and she was not disappointed at all by the interior. It was very luxurious, but had a homey feeling to it. It had wood finishing and was modern looking. The furnishings added to the beauty, and every detail was carefully selected and quality crafted. There were 4 bedrooms, each with a bi-level balcony overlooking the forest. There was a kitchen with modern supplies and utensils, a living room with plush carpeting, and a comfy-looking couch. And let's not forget a home theater and swimming pool. Is this heaven? When Matt showed her her room, she was delighted to find that it was furnished in Het favorite color, royal blue. The walls were a deep blue, and had the wallpaper of waves depicting the ocean. It had a soft white rug on the floor, which was so soft she could sleep there in that exact moment. The pillows on the bed were of a mixture of light turquoise blue, baby blue, dark blue and white, with a zigzag pattern. Do not get her started about the bed. It was soft and comfy. She turned towards Matt. You haven't robbed a bank or something, have you? She asks him suspiciously. His eyes widen as if his secret was out. Oh my God, who told you that? Damn it! I was starting to like you. Now that you know my secret, I have to kill you now, he says nonchalantly, making her eyes widen at his last words. Scared for her life, she takes a few steps back, trying to be discreet when Matthew suddenly starts laughing like a lunatic, with a hand placed in his knee, while he chuckled for a few minutes or so. Oh my God, it is always the good-looking ones that are batshit crazy, she mumbles out, now worried for his sanity and her life both. Hey? He exclaims, apparently hearing her words. I am not crazy. That is exactly what a crazy person would say, she retorts back. He scrunches his face up as if thinking something hard, then looks at her after a few moments. Hey, you know what, you are right, he says, pausing a bit, but you should have seen your face when I said that I would have to kill you. He looks smug now, grinning like a fool. Wah. You were joking. She looks at him stumped. He shoots her. An offended look. Hell yeah, I am not some petty criminal. Could have fooled me. She thinks to herself, but really, this is a cool place you got here. She looks around at the apartment. Yeah, She turns towards him, all the while beaming at him, and says, "Thank you, and I love it." He smiles and nods his head in reply. After 2 months. Asterisk, asterisked. Dream, asterisk. You use less, bitch. He spits out while holding her down like she was a rag doll. Punches are delivered and his pointy claws have left scars all over her body. Now that he was done with her for the day, he picks her up and flings her across the room like she was nothing but a used-up doll. She tries to sit up knowing fully well that she might have broken a rib or two. Her thoughts are confirmed when the broken ribs rub together, making her scream out in pain. Tears stream down her face mixed with her crimson blood. She gives up. She looks up at him through hazy and tear-filled eyes, which match his dark hazel brown that are filled with hatred and malice. It feels like she was staring at death himself. There is a sadistic gleam in his eyes, knowing full well that he is the cause of her pain. He loves seeing people in pain, especially her. His own blood. He steps towards where she was crumpled up on the floor, and with a final kick to her ribs, he pushes the door open and leaves her alone for the day. She drags herself towards her window and tries to sit up on the small sitting area near the window. Finally, when she climbs up, she looks out the window. One by one, the stars wink down at her. The pain is too much to bear, and the darkness surrounds and wraps her in it like a cocoon. She no longer cared. It has been a few minutes since she has been sitting there by herself. While looking out into the dark wilderness that is spread before her outside the window, she did not hear anyone entering the room, but suddenly she felt someone grab her wrist and hold them tight. Asterisk dream. Ends. Asterisk. She wakes up with a start, and she hears someone screaming, and it takes her a second to realize it was she who was screaming. Matthew was holding her down by pinning her hands down onto the bed and stopping her struggle effectively. She relaxes knowing that it was not him and that she was safe. She opens her eyes and meets his concerned eyes. She sits up and hugs him, and he lets her. His hands rub up and down her back in a soothing manner, and in between whispering things like, "It is okay, and I am here." She calms down after a little bit and pulls back from his hold. Her eyes cast downwards towards where her blanket pooled around her form, and it was damp due to her sweat, causing her to cringe. After a long silence, he opens his mouth and asks, "Do you want to talk about it?" She shakes her head sideways, indicating no. He understands that it was not something she wanted to talk about right now, so he does not push her to answer. "It is getting late. You should try to sleep," he says. Panic arises in her knowing that she could not sleep alone anymore. The nightmares that she had pushed to the back of her mind have resurfaced. "Can you sleep with me?" she asks him, and instantly flush red, realizing the double meaning it may had conveyed. He chuckles lightly, seeing her blush, and replies, "Okay," he says, and climbs into the bed. She scoots over to make space for him. This time, she fell asleep peacefully. After 6 months, she felt guilty not informing Courtney about her whereabouts, and she reminds herself to call her later. It has been almost 8 months since she has been staying with Matthew, and to even say that life had been good would be an understatement. It was blissful. Matt and she had gotten to know more about each other. She knew she liked him and he liked her too, so they had decided to try dating each other. It was almost like falling for someone all over again. Q-word almost. She was sure that with time that it would happen. She had not even thought about Damien and Emily once this past few months. She guessed it had something to do with Matthew and his crazy antics. She spent most of her time with him. He had been like her own support system, an anchor keeping her from sinking deeper into the depths of the terrorizing currents of the ocean that has been her life. She has nightmares occasionally, where she wakes up and finds Matthew holding her hands down to stop her from clawing and hurting herself. He only lets go after making sure that she will not harm herself, and afterwards he lays down next to her. He never asked her what the nightmares were about, and she respected him for that. But he knows that it is not anything connected to Damien, but something else. Something more sinister. Asterisk present time. Asterisk. Matthew and Serenity have been in the car for quite a few hours now, traveling towards the midnight moonpack. They decided it would be better if they got there as soon as possible, and Serenity did not want to anger her dear best friend, who may turn into Bridezilla herself. She was nervous and anxious to meet them all, especially a certain someone with stormy gray eyes. As if feeling her nervousness, Matthew places his hand on top hers while he drives with the other and says, "It is going to be just fine, and do not to forget, I am going to be with you." She shoots him a nervous smile. It is a 5-hour drive, and she realizes that they were nearing their destination. They were only 30 minutes away, and her nerves start getting the best of her. Her left leg starts bouncing up and down in nervousness. She looks out the window and recognizes the familiar forest on the way to the pack house, and she reminisces in the old memories of her running through these forests in her wolf form, and a smile takes over her face. At the nostalgic memory, after a few minutes, they arrive at their destination, and they get out of the car. They both walk towards the familiar building, which looked marvelous with white, gold, and black-themed intricate designs lining the walls. It was a big mansion meant for at least 200 pack members, if not more. On the way towards the front steps, the pack house door slams open, and Serenity gets to see a flash of brown hair, and before she knows it, she was tackled down by her best friend. She hugs her tight and yells, "Bitch, I missed you so much, and it is about time you came back," causing Serenity to laugh and reply, "I missed you too." Their reunion was cut off by Courtney saying, "Oh, look, who do we have here? I am guessing you are Matthew, her boyfriend." All the while, Courtney points a finger at Serenity, while saying but looking at Matthew. Serenity shoots her a playful glare. Matt looks at her amused and shoots her a smirk and replies, "Why, yes indeed, I am this beautiful woman's boyfriend," and snakes an arm around Serenity's waist, which causes her to turn shade of red. Matthew smiles amusedly down at her. Courtney gushes seeing this and says how cute and lovely. They both look together. Our reunion is interrupted when someone new speaks up and his voice is coming from the direction of the pack house. "Hey Court, who is it?" When the person looks up, his blue-green eyes widen when he sees Serenity. He runs towards where she was standing and engulfs her in his infamous brotherly bear hug. Serenity basks in the warmth and familiarity. She hears a growl which comes from Matthew, causing Serenity to elbow him in the stomach. He instantly recognizes his mistake and gives her a sheepish smile. "Sir Bear, where have you been? We missed you so much," Alex, her older brother, says and pulls back, looking at her with moisture in his eyes, but looks happy, nonetheless, to see his baby sister. Serenity shoots Courtney a look, realizing that she did not tell them the reason behind why she had left. She shakes her head in. "No." And Serenity turns to look towards Alex and say, "I couldn't stay here. It was painful and I missed you so much." She doesn't know what it was. Maybe something in her words might have stopped from asking her any more questions, but looks at her with a concerned gaze. "Where are Mom and Dad anyways?" She asks him to change the topic, which works since, and he replies, "They went on a vacation to Hawaii." Alex looks towards where Matt had been standing and asks him with narrowed eyes, "Who are you?" Serenity rolls her eyes, knowing that Alex loves playing the scary older brother card, and she could see that he does not find Matthew as a threat to his baby sister's safety. "I am her boyfriend." They both look at each other with narrowed eyes for a few moments, and then suddenly burst into laughter and engulf in a manly hug. Serenity and Courtney look at them like they have gone bonkers and shoot each other a worried glance. Men are weird indeed. Serenity shakes her head. She was so engulfed with meeting them that she hadn't noticed that someone had been watching their interaction all this time. Feeling the prickling sensation of being watched, she looks up towards window on the second floor of the pack house. Feeling the stare, the moment she looked up, and her eyes lock with stormy gray-colored eyes which held some kind of emotion that she couldn't decipher. She looks down, not being able to hold his gaze for long. "Courtney, Alex and Matthew were chatting with each other that they hadn't noticed a little interaction she seemed to share with the person. He has not changed much after all this time. He has grown manlier than the last time she had seen him and has a 5 o'clock shadow on his chin that makes him look dangerous and sexy at the same time. So, what are we waiting for? Let us go inside and let us get you guys settled. We have a lot of planning left to do for the wedding. Courtney says, breaking Serenity from her trance. Matthew and her agree to this and they walk towards the pack house. It is the next day, and Serenity was staying in her old bedroom. Nothing has changed about it. Everything is in its place, just the way she had left it, but she could smell a faint scent of someone, but she could not point out whose it was since it was stale. Maybe a pack cleaner has cleaned it before her arrival or something. She thinks to myself. Matthew was staying in the room next to hers. Though he does not sleep there as he sneaked into her room last night, he is currently out with Alex fishing in the nearby stream. Courtney is downstairs in the kitchen, making sandwiches for Serenity and herself. She was getting bored out of her mind staying in one place, so she decides to go downstairs and help Courtney. She passes by a few rooms, and just when she was turning to take a right from the hallways, she hears a piercing cry from one of the rooms, which makes Serenity to still at her spot. She decides that might as well check what it was. What she was not prepared for was to find a baby boy who was crying on the floor. Seeing this, she instantly rushes towards the baby and pick him up from the ground. It appears that he had fallen from the bed while crawling. "Oh, it is okay. Shh. Shh, don't cry." She tries to soothe him by rubbing his back while his head laid buried on her neck. She rubs small red spot on his elbow which definitely was caused from the fall. After a few minutes the baby calms down. She looks at the baby to find him already staring at her with stormy gray eyes. He has a small button nose and pouty lips. Now that she was really looking at this baby, she found that he seems kind of familiar, almost like someone she might know, but could not tell who. He is a really cute baby. He was wearing one of those black and white horizontally stripped onesies, with a black beanie with light brown pom-poms on his head. She knew for sure that he is going to be a looker. When he grows up he will going to have all ladies fawning after him for his attention. She smiles at the baby and coos and makes funny faces at him to which he squeals and giggles. He says something gibberish in his baby language while looking at Serenity. He lays his head in the crook of her neck and wraps his arm around her neck and looks up at her with those gorgeous gray eyes. Her heart melts seeing this. I wish I could have a baby of my own, she thinks to myself. She decides that she should take him with her, just in case he starts crying again. So she starts walking with him towards the pack kitchen, and find Courtney standing there making the sandwiches. Courtney! Her calls are gone unheard. Courtney! She says, a little bit louder this time to get her attention, and she succeeds when Courtney turns around and flashes a smile at her. But that look is replaced with shock when she sees the baby in Serenity's arms. Serenity looks down at the baby in her arms and asks her, Courtney, whose baby is this? She looks up at her after a few moments when she does not reply to find her giving Serenity a deer caught in headlights type of look. You know that, Courtney stutters out and she seems to be nervous for some weird reason that was unknown to Serenity. This only happens when she is hiding something or tries to lie about something. Spit it out, Courtney. I asked you a simple question. Serenity tells her, curious to know whose baby this was. It is Damien's and Emily's, okay? Honestly, I thought you would figure it out already. I mean, he looks exactly like Damien, I guess not. Courtney says and looks at Serenity with a wary look, almost like she was expecting Serenity to burst out crying. Celine, her wolf whimpers, mate, has a child with another female. She did feel pain and a deep hollowness within her. She had hidden it well during the past 2 years, and now it suddenly hit her all at once. Knowing that he has moved on caused her more pain than she would have liked to give him credit for. She thought she would never experience pain like that again in her life. since she has been numb to it for the past 2 years. The pain that came after realizing that had not been good enough for her own mate, and the hollowness and the void his rejection had caused her was on another level. Looking down at those stormy gray eyes, just like his father's, she felt like she had been left out on a huge part of what her life would have been if her mate hadn't rejected her. And at this moment she loathed him for rejecting her and stripping her off of her happiness. Tears prickle her eyes, but she keeps them at bay. Since was now a pro at hiding her emotions quite well, she looks up at Courtney and asks, "What his name?" "Elijah Blackwood." Courtney says proudly as he is the future alpha of their pack. Usually when a werewolf and human mates, their offspring is most likely a werewolf, as werewolf genes tend to dominate. These offspring have great control over their animal side and instincts, which is a plus. Children born of both parents being werewolves tend to act on their animal instincts, which are not a good thing most of the time, as their human side is overshadowed by their werewolf side, which is the dominant one. Sometimes, though, a human or even a she-wolf who wasn't the male's soulmate would find great difficulty in getting pregnant and having a child since it wasn't her place. In the first place, she looks down and smiles at Elijah, who stares right back at her with his gorgeous gray eyes. She says he is going to be a great leader one day. Courtney just smiles and nods her head. She almost forget about something that she had noticed, but forgot to ask Courtney, where is Emily, and why haven't I seen her yet?" At this, Courtney stills and flashes her a sad look. She passed away about 1 year ago when she gave birth to Elijah. The doctor said that she was physically and emotionally drained. Hearing this, Serenity's heart breaks at that. Sure, Emily was her mate's choice of Luna and his best friend, but that does not mean that Serenity hated her. In fact, she did not hate her at all. She was sure that if Emily had known that Damien was Serenity's mate, Emily would have never agreed to mate with him in the first place. "Oh," is all she could say. "She figured it out, you know," Courtney says, and Serenity gives her a "what do you mean" look, and Courtney continues. "She figured it out after 2 months into her pregnancy. He became more closed off than before and used to viciously torture the rogues and even innocent lone wolves. He and Emily always used to argue even after she had found out that she was pregnant. She was really happy." Courtney pauses for a moment, exhaling deeply but continues. "Even Damien was happy, but there still was a rock in their relationship. She eventually figured it out that he had found his mate and had rejected his own mate for mating with her. She somehow found out that it was you. Since your departure, he has been this way. She tried to reach out to you, but was unsuccessful. In a way, she blamed herself for the rejection." A lone tear escapes Serenity's eyes hearing this. Her leaving had created even more problems. It seemed to have caused the opposite effect. Different from what she had expected. "How has he taken the news of her passing away?" Serenity asks her. She wanted to know of his reaction. "He has been quiet most of the time, like usual, only replying when needed. He looks after Elijah when he is not tending to his pack duties. Usually the mothers of the pack look after Elijah when Damien has to attend important meetings. Elijah has been some sort of saving grace. Damien has not gone on a killing spree since his birth and is gentle when things come to his son." She replies, "He would have been a great dad to our pups, Celine." Her wolf voices out her opinion, causing Serenity to block her out. Nothing eventful has happened since knowing that het mate has a son. Now, it was nighttime and she was awakened from her sleep to the voice of someone crying. She thought that it was some pack member in need and follows the voice. She was surprised to find that someone was still awake at this time of the night. She could also hear the cries. She was standing in front of the same blue door which she had passed through to get to Elijah this very morning. She opens the door and finds him trying to climb out of his crib with tears streaming down his face. She rushes towards him and gently picks him up in her arms. His tiny hands fist my shirt. She sits on the matted floor and rocks side to side with him cradled in her arms. His cries doesn't stop. He hiccups occasionally but continues crying. At this point, she could only do one thing to make him stop. She sings to him. Silver light. She turned her face up to the starlit sky, and on this night, began to wonder why. She knew that soon the day would come, born to be an heir of beauty and serenity into this world. She entered quietly. To her surprise, she was the one. Destiny was close behind her, phantom of borrowed life, and the sea was a reminder, mirror of given light. He stops crying after a few minutes, and when she looked down, she sees that he had fallen asleep. She decides that she should put him back in his crib. She places him safely into his crib, trying not to make any sound, fearing that he would wake up hearing the noise. She tucks him in and places his blankie over him, feeling eyes on her back the whole time she turns around, but finds no one. Weird, she thinks to herself. Sad. Wente. Damien had just finished his alpha duty when he had heard Elijah's cries. Rushing towards his son's nursery, he finds the door open, and when he peeks inside, shock covers his face. He hadn't expected anyone to be up at this time. It was late, but Damien was a night owl. But of all people, he hadn't expected her. The mate he rejected to be the one to console his crying son. He watched as she took Elijah in her hands, sang a song which put Elijah to sleep faster than ever. A warm feeling crawled into Damien's heart, seeing the interaction. She watches as she turns back towards the door after placing Elijah back into the crib. Damien instantly moves away, knowing that she would see him if he didn't leave now. So he does exactly that. He leaves before she could see him. Matt and Serenity have been curled upon her bed for the past hour or so, watching Titanic. It was kind of funny how the person who was supposed to cry was not, and the one that was not was actually bawling their eyes out. She hears sniffling noises when the part where Jack dies at the end of the film from hypothermia, protecting Rose by having her float on a doorframe while he stays in the water plays on the screen. She turns towards her right and finds Matthew sniffling and sees tears trickling down his face, causing her to laugh. What? He grumbles at her, and not a second too later, she has stopped laughing when she was hit by a pillow, hitting her square in the face. Her eyes snap towards the culprit, and she narrows her eyes playfully and say, "Well, you know it is amusing to see a grown-ass man crying like a baby while watching the Titanic, and here I thought I was a cry-baby." She burst out laughing once again. "Shut it, or I am going to rub my snot all over your clothes." His threatening once again stops her laughter. "You wouldn't," she says, though she still felt a but very of him now. "Try me," he says, to which she glares at him. Matthew rolls his eyes and looks down at his lap where the empty bowl of popcorn lies. He looks up at her with puppy dog eyes. She tries her best to dodge his gaze, but she finally gives in. "Fine. Only because I love you." She takes the empty bowl from him and hear him shouting, "Love you too." She shakes head with a smile on her face. Sometimes he acts like a 5-year-old kid rather than a 24-year-old man. She passes by several rooms on her way to the kitchen, but her feet stop moving when she hears noises coming from a particular room. The door is left ajar, and she hears grunts and moans coming from inside the room. Her heart tells her not to open the door, but her conscience urges her to do the opposite. In the end, her conscience wins, and she pushes open the door. She was not prepared for the sight that greeted her. Her mate was on top of another girl with his tongs shoved down her throat. The girl lies on the bed while he is on top her and making out with her roughly. When he feels a presence in the room, He looks up and into Serenity's eyes, smirks at her, and continues with his action. Her eyes fill with tears. But she does not let them fall. She will not give him the satisfaction of knowing that his actions still affected her. He does not even feel guilty or bad about her seeing him making out with someone else. In fact, he almost seemed smug about it, and that stupid smirk. She wanted to slap it off of his face. She storms off towards the direction of her room, instead of going into the kitchen, which she had planned on going initially into. Matthew looks away from the laptop screen when he hears her barge into the room. "Hey, did you get the pop? Whoa, what happened? Why are you crying?" He fires questions at her, and she answers by nodding at his last question. "Come here." She goes towards where he was sitting up on her bed. When she reaches him, he pulls her towards him and hugs her tightly, and a choked sob leaves her. "What happened, Serenity?" Matt asks her again. "He doesn't care, Matt. I saw him making out with another girl and he didn't even feel bad that I saw him." She responds as tears stream down her face. "Shh, it is okay. Forget about your dick of a mate. He doesn't know what he is missing out on," he says, and she comply with him for now. Teen, seeing her after 3 years, has the beast inside of me going crazy for his mate, and not about his bloodlust. When his mate left him 3 years ago, his wolf went into a fit of rage and had basically gone on a killing spree, killing each and every rogue and innocent lone wolf alike, without mercy, torturing them for hours on ends with silver, and sometimes even using wolfsbane, if they decided to be stubborn asses. He lost his temper rather quickly while dealing with those mutts. Her verbal arguments with Emily did not help at all. He did not know how she found out that Serenity was his mate and that he had rejected her. But Emily did not know why, for which he was thankful. No one other than his father knows the reason. His father wasn't happy with Damien's decision. In fact, he was absolutely livid. He had been continuously tell Damien that everything was over and he did not have to reject his mate. But there was something else even his father didn't know about. Emily's death has made the beast inside him even hungrier for blood. But having his sons with him helps him at times. Although he rejected Serenity, the beast inside him has accepted her as his mate, but his human side does not. Seeing her with that former alpha makes his blood boil, and his wolf wants nothing more than to rip his head off for even touching his mate, but he manages to control it somehow. The wolf side of him loved how she got along with her son and how she made him stop crying, which Damien had failed on doing countless times in the beginning. Elijah usually does not take good to strangers. He throws a fit if someone takes him away from his father. Leaving him with the mothers of the pack was a difficult situation at first. Damien had to come back a few times in between important meetings, when he would receive a call in the middle of the meeting saying that his son would not stop crying. It came as a surprise to Damien when he saw her taking a crying Elijah into her arms and making his cries stop almost instantly, and placing him into his crib afterwards when he fell asleep. He was not supposed to care for her, but seeing her with him sometimes makes him dream about all the things they could have had. If only his life wasn't as fucked up as it was. He was currently sitting in his office, doing some paperwork, when the door to his office slams open, causing him to growl, not liking that someone was interrupting his work, and disrespect him by just barging in without his permission. He looks up from the papers that he was working on to find the pack's slut Melanie standing in the doorway of his office. She was dressed in a skimpy outfit. She was wearing a barely there piece of material that she was trying to pass off as a dress. It did very little to cover her ass or her chest. She had a constipated look on her face, which she apparently thought was a sexy look. He asks her through clenched teeth, "What are you doing in my office, Melanie?" "Well, I heard you were stressed with all the paperwork, so I thought I might help you with relieving some of your stress." She responds. If it were another time, he would have kicked her out of his office. With him being sexually frustrated and seeing his mate with another male, It had the smart part of him going right out the window. Fuck this. He thinks to himself. He gets up from his seat and moves towards her. He grabs her arm in a tight grip and pull her towards him, and she trails her hand up and down his muscled chest. This has his wolf growling at him in fury, but Damien blocks him out. Let's go to your room, he tells her, more like command her. If she even for a second thought that he was going to fuck some whore in his office or bedroom, then she was clearly wrong. He drags her behind him all the way. He follows her scent towards her room. He slams the door closed. In the next instant, Meredith, or whatever her name is, slams her lips onto his, causing him growl out. He had been doing that a lot recently. He tightly gripped her hands in mine. Never do that again, understand? He grits out through clenched teeth and she nods her head in fear. He pulls her towards the bed and rips the dress off her body and lays her on her back. He pulls his shirt off while keeping his jeans on. That mate of mine has been making it more difficult for him by showing off her lovely body. His laps capture the girl's lips, moving roughly, not paying any heed to her, while he had both of her hands held above her head. He did not want her hands roaming anywhere. He was so engrossed that he did not realize until later that someone has entered the room. He looks up and his gray eyes clash with hazel brown, but he does not stop shoving his tongue down the girl's throat. He flashes the newcomer a smirk and looks down at the female beneath him, who writhes with pleasure and moans. He looks up towards where his mate stood to find her gone. You hurt our mate, Killian. His wolf growls at him inside his head. Damien, as usual, ignores him. Get up. His mood instantly shifts. What? The dazed girl on his bed asks. I said, get out. Leave now. That was all it took for her to collect her bearings and leave his room in a hurry, not wanting to anger him any more than he was. He pulls on his discarded shirt back and leaves the room, walking towards his office. He sits on his office chair and heaves a sigh while dragging his hand down her face. His mind seems to play tricks on him by showing him his mate's hurt expression caused by his actions. It plays again and again until he slams his fists down onto the desk and stands. He walks towards the bar area, which is mainly for him and visiting alphas. He opens the bottle of vodka and takes a huge gulp of it, drinking directly from the bottle. Say, Wente, Matthew and Serenity have come out for a run. They have been sitting on top of a broken wooden log which overlooks the stream and the waterfall. It is so peaceful out here. The chirping of the birds and flapping of their wings accompanied by the sound made by the crickets. The water from the waterfall falls onto the stream in a steady pace, never once breaking the rhythm, which causes ripples to form on the water in a circular motion. They have been sitting in silence for the past half hour, just looking into the scenery before them, both lost in their own thoughts. Do you ever miss her? Serenity breaks the silence by asking the question. Matthew immediately understands who she was asking him about, his mate. It's silent for a few moments apart from the chirping of birds and swaying of trees as the wind passes by. Matthew hasn't answered the question, and Spee thought he never would. But a small smile plays on his face as he replies every day. Still looking forward the stream. She was not at all jealous that he still misses and loves her. Her own mate rejected her, and that is painful enough, but she couldn't fathom the pain Matthew might have gone through when his mate and unborn child were brutally killed by those filthy rogues. Does it hurts now, like how it did before? She asks him another question. He looks towards her and replies, no, it doesn't. You learn to live with the pain over time eventually. You become weak and vulnerable due to losing someone you love. You think that you can't never ever get out of that pit of darkness that surrounds you. But the first thing you should understand is that being vulnerable doesn't make you weak, it makes you the strongest. Because for you are strong enough to show this whole world your vulnerability, and that you are not afraid of it. In fact, you embrace it. And you are willing to fight, even though there is no reason left to. It feels as if he is not only talking about how own pain and experience, but something else like it is an indication from him to her. She smiles at his words, for she understood what he was trying to say. He knows full well that Serenity sometimes tends to get emotional and gets hurt easily by those she deeply cares about, and also that she tends to become more vulnerable because of betrayal and hurt they cause her. She was an emotional person. Tell me about her. She tell him after a few moments, and a sad smile covers his face. She was the most beautiful girl I've ever laid eyes on. Well, apart from you, of course. He winks at her at his last words, causing her to chuckle and shake her head. And he continues, she had long, thick brown hair which reached her waist, emerald green eyes that sparkled bright with life and innocence. She was shy just like you. Everyone in the pack was delighted to have her as their Luna. She used to help the elders of the pack if they needed help, cooked with the chefs and even played with the kids. She loved kids, and she was very happy when she found out she was pregnant. A hard look passes quickly over his features, thinking about the unfortunate event, but recovers quickly and smiles at the happy memories. Hearing him talk about his mate, even after her death in a loving way, reminds her of her own mate, who doesn't even want her. Sadness engulfs her whole being at the single thought. Am I not good enough for my own mate, Matthew? She asks him in a small voice filled with sadness, and Matthew turns towards her fully and cups her face with gentleness and says, I love you just the way you are. But you don't see you, like I do. You shouldn't try so hard to be perfect. Trust me, perfect should try to be you. A small smile breaks out on her face at those words. Matthew always knows what to say in such situations, to lift up her spirits. Thank you so much for that. I needed it. She replies with thankfulness. Matthew just shakes his head at her and removes his hands which were cupping her face moments ago. He furrows his eyebrows and asks her, Hey! Oh shoot! Alex and Courtney had left for the city a few days ago for buying their wedding dress, which they wanted to be a surprise, and also checking up on how the wedding preparations were going on. There was only 1 week's time left for the wedding to take place. Yes, they are. She replies to his question. She thinks it is about time they both head back to the pack house, as she was feeling extremely hungry, as she only had a Pop-Tart for her breakfast this morning. She turns towards Matt to ask him if he felt the same. Are you hung? She is cut off mid-sentence. Suddenly when she hears a growl and watches as Matthew's cheeks tinge with redness and reply, What? I am a grown-ass male, and that one bowl of cereal isn't going to cut it. I need to feed these babies. The embarrassment is quickly replaced with his usual bout of cockiness, as he flexes his triceps, causing Serenity to roll her eyes at his actions. Come on, you show off, and drag him towards the direction of the pack house. When Matthew and Serenity reach the pack house, they find that Courtney and Alex have already arrived. Currently, Courtney and her were preparing something for all 4 of them to eat. As the boys, Matthew and Alex, were watching a soccer game in the living room, Courtney's Serenity calls her, causing Courtney to look away from her chopping board of onions in front her. Her eyes are watering due to the onions. This causes Serenity to laugh. Bitch, you better shut up or I'll shove this fucking onion down your throat. She practically growls and Serenity gulps at her warning. She raises her hands in a surrender motion and says, Sorry, still trying to stifle her laughter by hiding her face behind her hair. You better be. Her eyes stays narrowed at Serenity for a few moments, and then she smiles, causing Serenity to look at her weirdly. Wow. I guess someone is on their period, or her inner bridezilla is making an appearance, she thinks to herself. She almost forgot that she hadn't asked Courtney about the wedding since she had arrived. Who all are the bridesmaids? Serenity asks her, and she replies while continuing to chop the onions. Some of the pack she-wolves I've befriended over the years. Serenity nods head at that. And what about the best man? She asks Courtney curiously. This causes her to still and turns towards Serenity. A guilty look. Serenity brushes it off and asks, Is it Matthew? She asks her excitedly. I am sorry, okay? I know you might not be happy with what I am going to say. You know how Alex and him are friends, and I just didn't want to throw you under the bus, and I knew you haven't told Alex or your parents about you finding your mate, and that he is the Courtney speaks in a hurry with a worried look on her face. No. I am the best man. A new voice joins in on their conversation, causing Serenity's body to still. Hearing his voice, she closes her eyes and turns towards the direction of the voice, all the while praying that it is not who she thought he was. But as she opens her eyes and she finds him standing in front of her, in all his glory, her hazel brown eyes meet gray ones. Great! I am doomed, she thinks. I turn towards Courtney and flash her an I am going to kill. You look. No. I am the best man. A new voice joins in on their conversation, causing Serenity's body to stills after hearing his deep voice. She closes her eyes. Cursing in her mind, she wishes that he would just disappear, that she was just a dream. But no. As she opens her eyes, he is still standing there in all his glory. His eyes holds a bit of amusement, which she wanted to wipe off immediately. Sadly, she didn't have the balls to go against an alpha, and secondly, she valued her life dearly. Great. I am doomed, she thinks to herself. Turning towards her left, when her best friend stood, she looks at Courtney with accusing eyes, causing Courtney to avert her eyes from hers. Serenity was rarely angered by anything. She remained calm most of the time, but if anything managed to make her angry, she was Spitfire. She continues to shoot daggers at Courtney with her eyes. We're talking about this later. She mind links Courtney and Serenity could see Het best friend visibly gulp. She turns towards Damien, looking at him with a blank face. She hasn't seen him after catching him and the other female literally eating each other's faces off. She didn't even want to talk about other extracurricular activities he might have indulged with, that she-wolf, whom her wolf wants to track down and rip her head off. Damien stares at Serenity with those steely gray eyes of his, but Serenity doesn't backs away from his challenging stare. Instead, she meets his eyes head-on. Take that, she wanted to say to his face. The tension in the room increases as it is considered as disrespect to stare at an alpha directly in the eyes. She could care less now. Alpha or not. She thinks to herself. Their staring match is interrupted by Darius, the third in command, or the Delta as they like to call it. Alpha, you have an important call from one of the Alpha of our neighboring pack. He speaks to Damien. Damien nods his head, in reply, all the while still staring at Serenity. He shoots a final look in her direction and leaves the room, followed by Darius, who shoots a quick smile her way, causing her to flash one back at him. She felt a bit pride, knowing that she had met his eyes head-on. She had never been so bold before. She felt good, especially defying the rules people have been following for ages. It feels like all the tension in the room had been gone with his presence, and her body visibly relaxes as she lets out a sigh. What was that about? Courtney snaps at Serenity, about whose presence Serenity had temporarily forgotten about during her staring match with Damien. Serenity narrows her eyes Courtney's tone of voice. What was what? She asks, acting oblivious but knowing what Courtney meant. You know what I am talking about. Are you out of your freaking mind? Staring at an alpha directly in the eyes means you are asking for a death warrant. She practically sighs after her rant. Serenity stays quiet, not replying. She seems to understand this, and shakes her head side to side while muttering something along the lines of her being a stubborn ass. Serenity almost forgot the reason why she was so close to losing her head, and her anger returns immediately. Speaking up, she confronts Courtney about the matter. Why didn't you tell me earlier that he was going to be the best man? Serenity snap at her and clench her jaw in anger afterwards. Well, I am sorry, okay? I was going to tell you. And it was Alex's idea to ask Damien to be his best man. She replies with a nervous look on her face, awaiting for Serenity's reply. Serenity suddenly understood Courtney's dilemma. She sighs knowing that it was not Courtney's fault, that Alex doesn't know about Damien and Serenity being mates, and how he rejected her. Well, it was Serenity herself, who had asked Courtney to remain quiet about the situation. She didn't want anyone to know about it. "It is okay, I understand, Court," she replies. Courtney smiles at her with gratefulness. T.Y. Next day, Serenity was walking towards her room while holding Elijah with her right hand and his bottle containing the baby food with her left. She could hear loud music playing from the direction where her room was situated, causing Serenity to scrunch her face in confusion. "I don't remember leaving the speakers on. Then who did?" she thinks to herself. It definitely wasn't an intruder, since which idiotic person would think about breaking into a house full of werewolf. Heading towards her room with caution, she decides to check it herself. She peeks inside her room through the half-open door, and she wasn't prepared for the sight that greeted her. To say she was surprised would be the understatement of the century. She looked at the person in front of her as if he was a deranged animal. She looks towards Elijah to find him looking at Matthew, like he was an alien from another planet, and she mentally agrees with him. "Me too, buddy, me too." Matthew is wearing a honey blonde wig that belongs to Courtney that she had worn once for one of the Halloween parties. The wig reaches his shoulder, and dare she say that he looks terrible in it. The speaker is playing the song, "Who Runs the World" by Beyoncé, while he twerks with his back to them. Wait. Scratch that, he is not twerking. He is trying to twerk but failing miserably at it by simply moving his butt up and down in the air. Her eyes widen to the size of golf balls with mouth wide open, gaping at him. She fears that she might catch some flies in her mouth, or that her eyes may fall out of their eye sockets. Looking down at the baby in her arms, she feels sorry for him. He might be scarred for life. She snickers under her breath when Matthew attempts to twirl, almost stumbling in the process. He faces towards the direction of the door where Serenity's was standing with Elijah in her arms, with his eyes closed and hands in the air, as if he is a celebrity. She decides to burst his bubble. "Quite a show you put on there, Matthew," she says, capturing Matthew's attention immediately. Matthew snaps his eyes open and looks at Serenity with a busted look on his face. His mouth hangs open with eyes the size of golf balls, causing Serenity to burst out in laughter. Seeing the comical look on his face, he recovers and responds her with "whatever," while flipping the honey blonde wig like the true diva he was. She enters the room while placing Elijah's bottle on her side table and carries Elijah towards her bed so that she could lay him down. She places him on the bed while barricading him by placing pillows all around him so that he doesn't rolls over and falls down again, like the first time she met him. She could hear some rustling noises around the room, causing her to turn, only to see that Matthew has discarded the blonde wig on the floor and has now opened Elijah's bottle cap and was drinking the baby food that she had prepared for him. Her mouth drops open for the second time in the past 10 minutes. "How dare he," she thinks. "Matthew," she hiss at him. "Place that bottle down now." Matthew opens his left eye to look at her and continues with his action, causing Serenity's cheeks to turn red with her growing anger. She didn't climb those flight of stairs for him to drink out of the bottle she had prepared. Covering Elijah's ears, who was looking at her innocently with both her hands, and she shouts at the idiot before her. "Matthew, you fat-assed hippo. Keep that fucking bottle down right now," she seethes. She swear might be throwing fireballs at him like a dragon if she could. Matthew stills and does a 180-degree turn to stare at his rear end while still clutching the bottle in his hand, and he shrugs to himself and turns towards her with a smug smirk on his face, which she wanted to claw out. "Ha! You are just jealous that my ass is bigger than yours," he retorts back, causing her to gape at him incredulously. "Did you just call me flat-assed?" she questioned him with narrowed eyes. "Nuwu," he replies with an innocent look on his face and then says, "Maybe," and smirks at her again. Her face bursts into an even dark shade of red, with anger that she runs towards him and tackles him down towards the floor. And the bottle is long forgotten. Matthew is taken back by surprise when she tackled him down as he was not expecting her to do it, so she decides to grab the opportunity and tug at his hair and shout, "How dare you! You! Chicken butt!" Matthew tries to pry HRR finger off of his hair while chuckling at het weak insults. "Try something new," he says, and she tugs at his hair again, hard causing him to wince. "You are an idiot," she shouts. Their wrestling match comes to an end when they both hear giggling, only to find Elijah sitting upright and looking at them with a smile on his face. Matthew, being the sucker for babies, decides to go towards Elijah and pick him up. "Hey there, little guy. Do you know me? I am Uncle Matthew." Elijah looks at him and cracks a smile at him and says, "Idiot," with an innocent look on his face. Serenity bursts out into full-on laughter by bending over her hand, slapping her knee with the palms of her hand, while seeing the surprised expression on Matthew's expression. "Ha! You deserved it," she says victoriously, and walks towards the discarded bottle on the ground to refill it up. She was too busy standing on her tippy toes and tried to reach for the bottle of baby food and failing miserably, causing her to let out a string of curses at the lack of her height. Why did she have to be so short? She thinks. She hadn't noticed the presence behind her until they were standing directly behind her back and reaching for the bottle she has been trying to make for the past 5 minutes with ease. She turns around to find Damien standing there with the bottle of baby food in his hands and places in on the counter. He places both his hands on side of the counter. She moves back to avoid his touch, only to press her back against the edge of the marble counter. She could literally feel his minty breath on her neck. She cranes her neck to look at him to find him looking at her with a hard look. Her heartbeat increases almost like a tattoo against her ribcage at the close proximity. Her wolf growls with approval at the increasing nearness with her mate. "You smell like him," he says through clenched jaw while grinding his teeth in a painful way. He lowers his head and buries his face into her neck and places both his hands on her waist. A shudder passes through her body at the contact, and small tingle zaps like electricity at the touch. "Tawistand, I loved you. At your darkest." Romans 5:8. Tend. Soon, anger takes over her features. When his words register into her mind, she pushes him away, catching him off guard since he wasn't expecting her to do so. He stumbles back in the process. Serenity takes the opportunity and moves away, putting distance between them. "Of course. He is my boyfriend after all." "Alpha," she replies spitefully, leaving him with a shocked look on his face. Stopping in her tracks, she adds, "Do not think that I will still keep waiting for you to accept me. I have some self-respect, and besides, you rejected me." Turning around and leaving. He deserved that. Celine, her wolf, decides to chime in, and she agrees. Few hours later. Nightmare. She wakes up from her sleep after hearing the clinking noise of metal together. He had locked her up again, up in the dungeon, where he locked up all the rogues and lone wolves that had dared to enter the territory. His territory. It reeked of blood, urine, and mold in here. At first she felt like puking her guts out, but after a few days she kind of learned to ignore the stench. She looks up from her slumped form on the ground, and her eyes find him with a sharp metal knife like the ones the butchers use to cut meat. She visibly gulps in fear. "Wake up, bitch!" His figure moves towards Het's slumped form on the ground and kicks her in the ribs, which was broken from the torture she had endured the previous day. She groans in pain as tears stream down her eyes, as she places a hand on her broken ribs and slowly gets up with a limp present on her left leg. "Get ready. An alpha is visiting today. Don't want him to see you like the little shit you are." He spat at her with a disgusted look on his face, and the only thing she could do was nod her head, knowing that he doins it likes her to talk unless asked to, or there might be consequences. That much has been instilled into her mind after all these years of torture and abuse by his hands. A shiver rakes down her body, remembering what happened the last time she disobeyed him. His rules, She drags herself all the way towards her room, which is basically a basement. She moves towards the drawers where she kept her dresses and pick out the only dress that doesn't make her look like a beggar and presentable enough. It is a flowy sundress which belonged to one of the she-wolves of the pack. She walks towards the bathroom, for which she was thankful for. She washes away at her body, removing the dirty scent and dirt out of her body, careful not to apply the soap on her open wounds, as it would burn like a bitch. She gets out of the shower after she was done and wears the dress she had with her along with her undergarments. She walks out just in time to see one of the guards standing there. "Alpha has demanded your presence," he says monotonously. She slowly nods her head and follow him out into the hallway. They stop walking when they reach the living room and the guard leaves her from his position in front of her. She find him and the visiting Alpha talking amongst each other, more about war strategies. He seems to notice her presence first, as he looks towards where she stood, looking at her with his heated gaze as he reckons her towards where they both were sitting around the table. She wasn't able to hold his stare for long. Her figure moves towards where they were standing all the while. Her eyes are locked on the floor, not daring to look up. She stops when she reaches their side. "Look up!" He grits out with a clenched jaw, and she complies to his order. She looks up to find an Alpha as old as him looking at her with a wicked glint in his eyes, which doesn't settle well with her. A shiver runs down her spine at his presence. "Alpha Landon, this is my 14-year-old daughter Serenity." Serenity meet Alpha Landon of Riverstone Pack. He speaks up. This is the first time in 10 years he had referred to Serenity as his daughter. She was taught from an early age to call him Alpha, and nothing else, or that she might get whipped if not done so. Alpha Landon hold up his hand for her to shake, and she nervously extend her hand, knowing that she would be punished later if she disrespect an Alpha in any form. Alpha Landon grips her hand in a handshake, all the while his other hand trails up and down her hand, which is in his hold, which makes goosebumps to rise on her skin. And not in a good way either. The clearing of a throat breaks the awkward handshake, and her father demands her to go towards her room. And she nods her head in reply. She drags herself towards the basement, which was her room, all the while thinking how it would have been better if she was alive. Wendy. She was so lost in her trail of thoughts that she didn't hear the sound of footsteps that had followed behind her. She was too late to react, as her back was slammed against the closed door of her room. Alpha Landon had pinned her hands above head with his one hand as he grinds his front into hers and groans as his finger trails down her delicate face, causing her to shivers in disgust. He continues to grind into Jur while she struggles to get out of his tight hold, but isn't successful. After a few unsuccessful tries, an idea forms inside her mind. She brings up her knee, and it hits him where the sun doesn't shine, and his face contracts into one of pain as his hold on her hands loosen. She takes the opportunity to move as far away from his crouched frame. Leave her body still's hearing that voice, and she look up to see her fath. Him, with a murderous look on his face, causing her to gulp, knowing that she was in trouble. Alpha Landon leaves the room, all the while glaring at her trembling form on the side. He closes the door shut when Alpha Landon leaves. "Now what have I taught you about not disrespecting an Alpha?" She don't reply to him, which causes his anger to rise as he moves towards her trembling form and slaps her across the face with such force that she might have passed out on the spot if she wasn't a werewolf. "Speak up, bitch," he spits out venomously. Her mouth opens but nothing comes out. This angers him even more as he takes out the whip, which he keeps in inside room for an easy access. She closes her eyes shut in fear of what was to come. "You know, I wish you would have died along with her, or at least, you were a boy so I could have had an heir to rule this pack." He speaks up while holding the black whip in his hands. Tears trail down her face when she hears him speaking about her mother and his mate. She opens her eyes just in time to see the whip to slash across her already bruised and battered back. "No, please don't. I wouldn't do it again," she pleads to him. She wakes up to feeling of someone holding her hands down to prevent her from clawing her own chest. She looks down and sees claw marks and blood littering the entire expanse of her chest. She is suddenly really conscious, feeling someone's hands holding her down. She looks up just in time to see an emotion passing through those gray orbs, which are now a bleeding black in color. She inhales a shaky breath, still recovering from the aftermaths of the nightmare she just woke up from screaming. She is aware of the tears that are trailing down her face and the fact that he got to see her in her most vulnerable state. "I am okay now," she says, and he slowly and hesitantly removes his hold on her hands. She got up from her upright position on her bed and moves towards the direction of the bathroom. She splashes cold water on her face to wake up and wash away the remnants of the horrible nightmare she just had. She gets out of the bathroom to see Damien sitting on top her bed with an impatient look on his face. His face snaps up towards where she is standing when he hears the sound. He gets up, starts walking towards where she was standing. She takes a step back in fear and her back hits the wall. He stops when there is an inch of space between them, causing dread to fill her features when she hears the words leaving his lips. Who was he? With a dark look on his handsome face, she stays quiet, contemplating whether she should tell him or not. She opens her mouth to say something, but she is cut off by a familiar voice. "Serenity, well, what are you doing here?" Matthew is standing at the door looking like he had run a marathon with his tousled hair and crumpled up t-shirt, his question directed at Damien. Damien had an angry look on his face when he replies, "None of your fucking business, pup." Hearing the word pup makes Matthew MD Alphas don't take lightly to be insulted and being called a pup. That is a big no-no. Matthew takes a step forward. He starts speaking. "Actually it is. Serenity is my girlfriend, so it is my business, Alpha." Saying the last word in a taunting manner, which makes Damien more angry. Both of them are chest to chest, glaring at each other. "She doesn't need you," Damien says through clenched jaw. "Oh really? Let her decide for herself," Matthew replies, and both of their heads turns towards her for an answer. She panics inside, not knowing what to do. Although Damien might be her so-called mate, Matthew had been there for her every time she needed someone by her side. Besides, Damien lost any claim he had on her when he rejected him. She avoids Damien's gaze, knowing that he was staring at her through those piercing gray eyes of his. A few moments passes like that in the same position. Finally, she lifts her head and speaks up, breaking the silence that had spread among them. "Matthew." Matthew smirks at this. She looks towards Damien to see some emotion, almost like hurt, crossing through his eyes for a fleeting second before it is gone, which honestly confused her. Why would he be hurt? Damien looks furious now and shooting a last glare at Matthew. And a look her way. He storms out of her room. Matthew walks towards her bed and sits on it, quietly ushering her towards him, knowing that she needed this form of comfort. Without breaking the silence, he pulls her onto his lap. She usually shies away from intimate things like cuddling, but Matthew loves it. Her body immediately relaxes in his hold because of the familiarity it brings her. She lays her head on his shoulders as a support and heaves a sigh thinking about random things. She doesn't know if anyone would ever understand the type of relationship Matthew and she shared. Have you ever felt a bond with someone which consists of not only love but comfort and understanding? Although they are dating, and even if they were to break up, they would still remain best friends and be there for each other, through thick or thin. Sedi. Next day, Matthew and Serenity were bored sitting in the room, watching random shows on Netflix. "Hey, let's go out for a run," Matthew speaks up while skimming through the different shows. She nods my head, agreeing with his idea. They walk downstairs and out of the pack house. They part ways as she goes behind a tree to shift into her wolf. She removes her clothes and ties the clothes around her ankle and shift into her brown wolf. She walks towards the forest, instantly spotting Matthew's big black wolf, standing in front of her. A plan formulates in her mind. She hides her scent and creeps her way towards him. When she is within a close proximity, she nips at his tail and takes off running. She doesn't look behind. She hears Matthew release a playful growl and takes off after her, taking it as a challenge to catch her. She knows that she cannot outrun an alpha, and also knows that Matthew can easily catch up to her. But she tries anyways, knowing that there is no harm in trying. Matthew jumps upon her back the moment she decides to slow down her pace so that she could turn back and look at him. Which wasn't clearly a bright idea on her part. His wolf playfully tugs at her fur, occasionally licking and growling playfully. This continues on for a while. She cherishes moments like this where she gets to forget that her own mate, who was supposed to accept and love her unconditionally, had rejected her for someone else, that being her best friend, who is dead now and has left behind a son with her mate. And that her life isn't sunshine and rainbow every time. She feels so blessed to have Matthew in her life, and SG would choose him over anyone, even over her. Said mate, her wolf whines at her sad trail of thoughts. She shakes those thoughts away and focuses her attention on the black wolf crouched before her with his tail wagging from side to side. She snickers in her wolf form at the scene, in front of her, which doesn't sit well with Dom, short for Dominic aka Matthew's wolf. He growls playfully for the 100th time that day, before nipping at her sides and taking off deep into the forest. Her wolf immediately takes off after his wolf, who is now nowhere to be seen. She trots through the thick canopy formed by the trees. It is almost dark in this part of jungle because of the tall trees surrounding the area that you would think it is nighttime. But in reality, it is daytime. Her wolf occasionally stops to sniff out his scent. Her wolf could hear the birds chirping and dripping of water droplets could be heard. It's after a few minutes that they come to the conclusion that they were completely lost. They meaning she and her wolf, but what had her senses going crazy was the unknown scent her wolf was able to sniff out from the air, and it was fresh. Meaning that they had been there for a while now. It smelled like death and rotten flesh, causing her nose to scrunch up in disgust. Her wolf tenses up when they manage to hear a twig snapping in the distance. Her ears stand up straight and strain to pick up any sound. Her wolf's head snaps towards the sound. Just in time to see a gray-colored flash, and she realizes that it was a wolf. Her wolf growls at the enemy and takes off in the direction it went, when she reaches a nearby stream where she had seen the rogue taking off into. She sees nothing there, but what caught her attention was a piece of paper hanging from one of the trees with the help of a knife, and a shiver runs down Het's spine, knowing it is made of silver. Whoever was here wanted her to struggle to get the paper. She immediately shifts into her human form and put on the clothes she had wrapped around her ankle. She moves towards the paper that she had spotted. She almost takes a step back when she sees the blood and dirt smeared on top of the paper. She plucks the knife from the paper, but using her shirt to cover her hands as she does so that it wouldn't burn her fingers due to the silver. She tugs at it for a few minutes and is finally able to pull the knife out. She opens the folded paper, and her breath hitches the moment she sees the words scribbled messily on the paper. With blood, and what has her shaking was the initials at the bottom, by which she knew who it was instantly. That she hasn't heard in a long time. Found you, my dear daughter. Re. She almost turns around and attacks the person behind her, when she had felt their hands on her shoulder. She turns back around and sees Tay. It was just Matthew, who has now put on a pair of shorts and is shirtless, looking at her with a worried look on his face. What is that? He asks her curiously while she was still coming to terms with the contents of the letter. She shows him the letter. A letter. She replies shakily, her voice almost a soft whisper. Matthew's brows are crunched together with confusion. From whom? He asks her again, not able to understand the wry on the bottom of the letter, and she knows that there is no escaping this time from past. From Alpha Roman Ivanov, also my biological father, she replies and takes notice of the shock covering his features, but they suddenly turn deadly when he remembers the name she told him. Fuck! He grits out and takes a step towards her with a dark look on his face, causing her to take a step back in fear. She has only ever seen him with this look on his face when she met him for the first time 3 years ago when she had asked him about his mate. His eyes are black, meaning his wolf was in control. Matthew, what happened? Why are you? She is immediately cut off when his wolf growls and grits out, "He killed my mate, and this time it is her who was shocked with this new piece of information." Matthew, what happened? Why are you? She is immediately cut off when his wolf growls and grits out, "He killed my mate, and this time it is her who was shocked with this new piece of information." And what the hell do you mean by he is your father? I thought you and Alex had the same parents, he asks. She sighs into fear and replies in a tone which implies that she was not ready to talk about it at the moment. "No, I was adopted by the Martins when I was 14. Silence surrounded them as Matthew took in the information. Meanwhile, Serenity thought back to what he had said just a few moments ago. She was confused to say the least. "Wait, wasn't your mate and pack killed by rogues?" She asks him confused, because as far as she knows, his pack was attacked by a group of rogues, maybe even a pack of them. "Yeah, but they were led by your father," he grits out, and she sighs. It seemed like she really didn't know a thing about the person who she was supposed to call father. He was far more dangerous than she thought he was. "Hurry up! We've to inform Damien and the others," Matthew exclaims after a few moments of silence. His words leading her to panic. "No, I mean not today." She could see the look on his face which clearly showed that he disapproved of her idea right away, but she continued speaking anyway. "Look, it is only for a day or two. It is Alex and Courtney's wedding tomorrow, and I don't want to ruin it for them." She says, "Think about the number of people's lives that is on the line. Serenity. People will most probably lose their lives if we don't do anything now." Matthew replies with a worried look on his face. She moves towards where he stood and places her hands over his shoulders, effectively calming him down. "We will inform Damien about it the first thing after the wedding. Is that okay?" She asks him, and he nods reluctantly after a few moments of contemplating. "Tendo, wet, at the wedding. I think I am second-guessing this. Oh my God, I think I am going to be the next runaway bride," Courtney says nervously. Serenity had been watching her best friend pace back and forth for the past 5 minutes and mumbling about how she is going to run away from her own wedding. "Oh hell no, that isn't going to happen on her watch." Courtney was wearing a white gown, which flares out in a perfect manner, which makes her waist look smaller than usual. Her hair is in loose curls. To say that she looks beautiful would be an understatement. "Court, you know that I love you, right? But if you leave my brother alone at the altar, I'll make sure that I find you and kill you myself." She tells Courtney in a semi-playful way. Courtney sighs. "I am nervous. Hey, look, everything is going to be all right. You don't have to worry, and plus my brother loves you to death." She tries to comfort her best friend as much as she could. Courtney visibly relaxes, as if Serenity telling her that Alex loved her was what she wanted to hear all along. Serenity shook her head at that. She felt arms wrapping themselves around Het waist, and mere seconds later hears a voice speak. "Hey there, beautiful," causing her to blush a crimson in color. She turns around to find Matthew looking like the handsome guy he is in his white tuxedo. She was currently wearing the dress which Courtney picked out for her. She had to admit it, Courtney had an impeccable taste in anything related to fashion. It was a beautiful white cropped bustier top with a matching high-waisted skirt featuring a thigh-high slit, which revealed part of her stomach, about which normally she would have been self-conscious. But it didn't bother her now. In fact, it made her feel confident for some reason. And she liked that. She was forced into wearing through metallic strappy heels by Courtney, and Serenity was 100% sure that she would end up falling flat on her face at some point into the ceremony. She decided to wear the shimmering diamond necklace Matthew had gifted Het on her 20th birthday a while back. The makeup artist had done her makeup since she was hopeless at it to even begin with. She described it as a modern take on old Hollywood, with a classic red lip and sparkly cat eyes. Her hair was in a tightly twisted bun, which went well with the look. "You don't look bad yourself," she tells him. "Well, why, thank you, milady. I am honored," he replies while bowing in an old-fashioned gentlemanly manner, causing her to laugh at his antics. The joyful moment is cut short when Het eyes find a certain gray-eyed alpha. He looked drop-dead gorgeous in his black tuxedo. It enhanced his model-like body, and the tux fit snugly around his biceps, tightening whenever he flexes his arms to do anything. But what caught her attention right away was the baby in his arms, who was wearing the same clothes as his father, excluding the jacket. Her heart melts seeing Elijah. He looked so cute in his little black vest and bow. Her eyes meet Damien's from across the room. She looks away after a few moments, not being able to hold his intense stare any longer. 1,000 Years by Christina Perry starts playing, causing her to turn her head just in time to see the former beta, aka Courtney's dad, walk her down the aisle towards where Alex stood, who looked handsome in his black tuxedo. She smiles in happiness for the both of them, watching as they both said their wedding vows and I-dos. Kiss each other all the while Matthew stood beside her, with his arm wrapped around her waist. She could feel a piercing stare on her back, which felt like it had left a fire in its path. She couldn't help but squirm in her position. She knew exactly who it is, but she didn't dare to meet his eyes. "Serenity, would you like to dance with me?" Her head snaps up towards Matthew. He knows for a fact that she doesn't dance, but she couldn't say no to him, especially when was looking at her with those big puppy dog eyes. Oh, he knew exactly what he was doing. Cheeky bastard, she thought, with a smile on Het face nonetheless. Yes. She sighs in defeat. Matthew leads her towards the dance floor, and she was able to see many other couples dancing. Matthew places his right hand on her waist and takes her right hand with his left one. They spin, waltz and twirl around the room, and it is safe to say that she actually enjoyed it and was laughing the whole time. She lays her head on his shoulders and just sway from side to side when a slow song comes on, feeling at peace in her current position. When Damien had seen her enter the hall, where the wedding ceremony was to take place, wearing that white dress which made her look like an absolute goddess, he couldn't stop staring at her. She was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. He was aware of the fact that she could feel his burning stare on her back, but she chose not to acknowledge it, and instead she was laughing and chatting with her boyfriend, which made his blood to boil in anger. Sometimes he had to remind himself that he was the one who rejected her, and not the other way around. He didn't have the right on her anymore. Well, he never did. But he never felt their mate bond weakening, most probably because he never wanted to reject her at all. But sometimes you just have to sacrifice your happiness for the greater good. He watched as they both, Serenity and Matthew, dances elegantly from his position from the corner of the room, all the while sipping on his wine. He watched as she places her head on Matthew's shoulder and sways from side to side when a slow song started playing. Damien grits his teeth and looks away. The wolf side of him was begging to come out so bad, but he reined in the urge, his grip on the glass tightening to a point where he might just break it into numerous little pieces. You know what? Fuck it, he thinks to himself. He places the wine glass on a nearby table and taking steady strides towards the dancing pair. "May I have her?" he says, effectively bring them back from their bubble and catching their attention. They both break apart, seeing him standing in front of them. It was more of a demand than a question on his behalf. Matthew looks at Serenity, who had a tense look on her face. Matthew looks back at him and nods his head. Matthew places her hand, which he was holding into before, into Damien's outstretched ones.